When it comes to developing a 2D action game, there are two schools of thought on how to go about your actual fighting. You can go the simple route like Hollow Knight, where you simply have a slash that goes either up, down, left, or right, ending there. Or you can have a more complex comboing system like Guacamelee or Brawlhalla, where attacks chain together one after another. Whereas the former is a lot simpler to accomplish, the latter can easily create a lot of issues when it comes to how you consolidate this system. Very quickly, the complexity of what you do can balloon, as well as creating a lot of bloat where you don't really need it to. Today I'm going to show you a nice, easy solution on how you can accomplish this using the power of the finite state machine. Now, much like the last video, there's going to be a few prerequisites. For example, watching the last video. I'm not going to go in depth into how the finite state machine works again because I already covered that in my previous video. I will go over it and gloss over it just a little bit so you won't be completely lost, but it's much better if you go and check out that video previously because I go in a lot more detail and it's very helpful to understanding this one. Secondly, whereas last video I didn't really go into a lot of Unity specifics, I will be going into a few of those in this particular video because this is a more Unity-centric tutorial. Last one was more conceptual based on the concept that I was trying to teach, and this one will be a more traditional Unity tutorial, so if you're here for any other engine, you're in the wrong spot. Lastly, I'll have the entire repository of this project up on my GitHub, so if you haven't checked it out from the last video, feel free to go check it out in the description below so you have a little bit more detail into what I did in my process as a whole. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. Now, before we get started, it's important to mention that the bulk of our assets will be coming from the Hero Knight Pixel Art Unity package by Sven Thol. And although you can use any type of 2D assets, there will be a link in the description below if you want to use the exact same ones that I am. And to that point, there is a demo scene in that package. However, a lot of this doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters here is this Hero Knight object, which I have emptied out. And the only thing in here that's important is the animator and the sprite renderer, as well as the child object of the melee hitbox that I added, which only simply has a 2D collider attached to it. Now we're going to be manipulating all of these things, so it's important that you have at least this object in your scene before you get started. As mentioned at the start of the video, this is going to be building off the finite state machine concept introduced in my last tutorial video, and this is another chance to go check that out if you haven't already. But continuing off, we're going to be importing two classes. That's going to be the state class and the state machine class. The state class is an abstract base class consistent of three key functions: on enter, on update, and on exit. On enter will be used to initialize key variables, on update will be used to manipulate those variables, and on exit will be used to clean up any variables that we have and so see fit. And the state machine class is a simple finite state machine that will be running these states and swapping them out as per usual. For more details, please once again go check out that video, and that's all the information that you'll be getting on those particular things. Now to start off this project, we're going to create a bunch of classes. Three classes we want to create off the bat are combo character, idle combat state, and melee entry state. However, we're going to put these classes off to the side. We're just creating them just to have them at the moment. Now next, we're going to create the main class that will be running the show here, called melee base state. The wonderful thing about the 2D combat system is that a lot of the functionality for each attack will be shared with only minor differences to them. The great thing about that is we can create a base class holding all of that functionality and derive child classes for each attack, so we don't have to rewrite the same code over and over again. On top of that, we're going to create three more classes to do just that, called ground entry state, ground combo state, and ground finisher state. The reason we're creating these three is because, well, that's what our animation set has to offer, a simple 3-hit combo. This is where things might deviate for you if you have more or less than 3 attacks in your animation set, and as well as this is where the power of the system is shown off. This can work with any number of attacks you might have, from 2 to an infinite number. The only limit is what you have in art to match and how many attacks your character might have for their combo, and it'll work the same in the end. Now with all that said, let's work on filling out our states so we can get our animations firing and our combo system going. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and fill out our melee base state. And the first step to that is, well, deriving it from our state class. All of our state classes are going to be, well, state classes, obviously. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to fill out a few variables. The first variable is going to be the duration variable, and this is how long the state should be active for before moving on. At minimum, you want this duration value to be set to, at the very least, the amount the animation that is playing is. It can be any longer than that, but we probably don't want this moving on before the attack animation is finished, unless you want to throw in something that allows for animation cancels. But for now, we're going to keep it at a minimum of the animation length. The next thing we're going to need is, well, a reference to our animator. We want to be able to call our animations inside each state, so every single state can call its animation per attack. This is a way so it can be manageable and keep confined within this state system. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a protective bool that will be set whether or not that this attack will combo. This will be set up by our inputs, which we'll set up in just a second. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to keep track of which attack index this particular attack is per attack, so that we can keep it for general sake as well as consistent naming convention across the board. Our on enter function is going to be fairly simple. The only thing we're going to do for now is we're going to get the animator component off of the object is attached. Now, a lot of combat systems are animation driven, and ours is going to be no different, though a lot of the functionality that we're going to have is going to be inside of our states. A good chunk of it is also going to have to be driven by the animator, which isn't such a bad thing. Our onUpdate function is going to be just as simple for now. It's simply going to listen for the input of the left mouse click, and if it does, it's going to set our shouldCombo variable equal to true, which will tell our states it's allowed to send it to the next combo rather than sending it back to main, which I'll explain in just a moment. And with that, our melee base state is fully set up. The onExit function is going to remain empty, as we don't need to really clean up anything for now. Finally, we're going to set up our ground entry, ground finisher, and ground combo states, and they're all going to be fairly similar in nature. They're going to all derive from the melee base state, which means a lot of the things that we would have done are already done because the melee base does it. All we simply need to do is set the attack index to 1, 2, 3 accordingly, from entry, combo to finisher. Set the duration equal to values that we feel comfortable with. I like 0.5 personally. And lastly, we're going to take the animator component and we're going to set the trigger equal to attack plus attack index, which I'll explain in just a second. I also put some debug log text in there so that it makes it easier to test and make sure things work accordingly. And finally, in the onUpdate function, it's simply going to check to see if the duration has elapsed, and if the shouldCombo bool is set equal to true, it's going to set it to the next state that it should. On entry, we'll set it to ground combo state. Ground combo state will set it to finisher, and finisher will set it back to main. Now, if the shouldCombo variable isn't set in ground entry and ground combo, then you will also simply set it back to main, which will essentially reset the entire combo altogether. Now, with that all set up, we have everything to kick off actually running this combo system. The only thing left to do is set up the classes that will allow us to test and see these particular things fire off. And we're going to start off with the idle combat state. This is going to be fairly simple. You're going to derive it from the state class like the others, but this state is going to be completely empty. Now, the reason why this state is going to be empty is going to be shown in our combo character class. Now, our combo character class is going to be a pseudo player character class, and the very, very bare bones that we can make it. I'm only going to use this to check to see if the input is clicked to kick off our state machine. However, there's an issue with just checking to see if the input is hit. We don't want to change the state if the input is at a later time in the combo. We only want to check it to see if it's at the beginning of the combo, and that is where the idle combat state comes to play. This is going to be our main state type. It's just going to be a blank state that continuously runs no logic, so we know that the state machine is ready to start firing off a brand new combo. Now, when the checks are met, we want to set it to the melee entry state. The melee entry state is going to be our hub for all melee combos that we create in this process. You might have more than one combo. You might have a combo that enacts when you're in the air or on the ground or swimming or whatever. This is the place to put that kind of logic so you know which you're firing is correct. Now we're only going to create one state, and that's the ground state. And so in this particular instance, all this class is going to do is to set the ground entry combo and continue firing it. Now that we've set the coding groundwork, it's time to start creating these animations and the animation controller so that we can see this in action on itself. Now, if you've been following along and using the Hero Knight pack, this does come with a suite of animations as well as its own animation controller. However, we're going to be creating our own animation controller for the sake of simplicity. This animation controller will only consist of a few states, one of them being idle, and we're going to create 3 new states called Attack 1, Attack 2, and Attack 3. Now, although we're going to be creating a new animation controller, we're not going to be creating new animations. We're going to be using the ones that came with this. We're going to be using Hero Knight _ Attack 1, Attack 2, and Attack 3 in their respective orders to where they would go on the state machine. Now, the important thing here is that all 3 of these attacks are going to come off of the any state node. To those of you who are new to the animation side of Unity, any state is a special state which is always present. It exists for situations where you want to go to random things, and in this particular case, we're doing that right here. We want to be able to attack from any state regardless, and even though there's only idle state here, this is probably a good practice for this kind of system. Now, what is actually going to trigger these states from the any state node might be your question. Now, you might remember that we set up on the onEnter functions of all 3 of our attacks a trigger. And we're going to create those parameters right now in Attack 1, Attack 2, and Attack 3. We're using this naming convention so we can use that index that we created in Melee Base as an easy way to continuously call off these attacks without having to change too much code. Finally, we don't want any delay stopping us from each attack, so we're going to take off all the exit time and fixed duration from each of the transitions from any state to the attack. However, we're going to keep the transition time at a fixed of 1 for exit time on the way back to idle, because this is what I found fits best for this kind of animation set. With that all said and done, all that's left is to set up the character. If you haven't already, add the combo character script and the state machine script to your character. Lastly, if you want to add in the custom name for the particular state machine, you can go into the onValidate section and add in the name combat and set it straight towards the idle's combat state that we've created earlier. And after you've hooked that all up, once you start playing and you start clicking the left mouse button, you should start seeing the attacks come in full force. Every single time you hit the attack key, it will hit the next weapon for the next swipe, and if you stop after a certain amount of time, it won't continue the state. Now, this is all fine and dandy as a base, but you can't really call it a combat system without dealing damage, so we're going to do that right now. To start this off, we're going to create a new class called Team Component, and this is going to be fairly simple. All this is going to do is it's going to hold a public enum of type Team Index, which will be of none, neutral, player, and enemy, so we know that what we're hitting is something we actually want to damage. Next, we're going to probably want to put an object in there to hit. You can use any type of sprite that you may or may not own. I'm going to use a custom one that I had created for a different project here. You can use whatever you want, from a square to a circle to maybe even another Hero Knight. Anything is fine as long as it's just a blank object, and all you simply want to do is you want to add a box collider 2D to it and make it a trigger, as well as adding in your new team component script on top of it. Now that the boilerplate is set up, we can get into the nitty-gritty of things. Now, before we hop back into code, I want to set up the animations a little bit better to facilitate damage. First things first, the hit collider we have currently is set to this awkward place that isn't accurate with the animations we have. This is where animation-based attacks are super handy. After clicking on our Hero Knight object, it allows us to manipulate the animations this object is currently using, unlocking the Keyframes recording feature. This allows us to add custom manipulations to the object based on the frame of the animation it's on. We're going to use this to do a few things, the first of which being manipulating the shape of the hit collider to better match each swing on the frame on all three of our animations. Next, we're going to create two new float parameters for the animator called weapon active and weapon attack window.open. If you haven't noticed, our collider is always on. Instead of using Unity's on collision functionality that's always firing, we're simply going to use the bounds of the box to do our own check. However, we don't want this check to happen at all times. With this in mind, we're going to set the weapon.active to 1 when we want it to be checking for hits during the animation and 0 when we don't. As well, we don't want the player to always be able to hit the button at any time they choose to enact the next attack. For most games, precise inputs are just as important to a successful combat system. With that in mind, we want to set when the player is allowed to hit the input key to successfully enact the next swing in the combo, making it feel smoother and less clunky as a whole. Setting attack window open to 1 a little after the initial swing is done with each attack. The reason why we're using float and not int is because we're not allowed to do this with ints for some reason, and I'm not sure why, but that's just Unity for you. Last but not least, we're going to add in an effect to the system, and I'm not going to create an effect for the sake of this tutorial. However, I will leave a link in the description to a pack that I am currently going to be using for the representation of this particular hit from the 2D magic and attack effects from Studio DCT, also in the Unity store for you to use. With all that in place, we're ready to finally jump back into code. The first thing we're going to open up is our combo character class once again. And this is going to be fairly straightforward. All we're going to do is we're going to add in a serialized public variable for our Collider 2D called hitbox, as well as a second serialized public variable. It's going to be a game object called hit effect prefab. Now with that out of the way, the rest of the functionality is going to be back into our melee base state. Again, showing off the power of the system, we only really need to make changes to this one particular class. The first things first we're going to have to do to help facilitate our attack functionality is adding in a few more variables. The first one is going to be a protected collider 2D called hit collider, and this is going to be, of course, our cached hit collider that we were using for our melee attacks. The next is we're going to add a private list of collider 2Ds called colliders damage. This is going to be used to cache in our already struck objects of our attack so that our attack doesn't hit the same target multiple times in a single swing. The next is going to be a reference to our hit effect prefab as well. On enter, all we're going to simply do is initialize all of these particular variables, setting our list equal to a new list, getting our collider off of our combo character, as well as our hit effect off of our combo character as well. We're going to skip over on update for now, and we're going to create a brand new function called attack, and this is also going to be protected. This function will work as followed. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an array of collider 2Ds as well as a contact filter 2D and set that filter to use triggers. This is so we can use the physics2d.overlap collider function, which takes in all three of these variables. What this will do is it will take our bounding box and see if anything collides with it and spit out a number of how many colliders are hit, as well as filling out that array we just created. If we have any number of colliders, we're going to iterate through that number of colliders, and we're going to check to see if our colliders damage list that we created earlier has contained any of the colliders that we have hit. If it doesn't contain it in that list, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to see if that collider that we hit has a team component attached to it. If it does, we know that's a collider that we actually want to damage. And then we're going to check to see if that hit collider in particular is of a certain type. In this particular case, it's going to be enemy. Inside that if check, we're going to instantiate the hit effect on top of the collider we need to damage. We're going to spit out a debug log, as well as we're going to add this collider to the list of colliders so we don't damage it again in the next attack and continuously spawn overlapping hits. And with that function out of the way, we have pretty much everything we need to do to deal damage. The only thing to do next is go into our own update function. We're going to be adding in a new if check. We're going to check to see if weapon active is greater than 0, and if it is, we're going to call our attack function for as long as we need to. Lastly, with our attack window.open added, you might have noticed that the window to be able to enact a new attack is a little small depending on how many frames you have. In our particular case, we only have 7, and we only allowed for about 3 frames per attack for the attack to come in. In this particular case, it's a good idea to add in a simple input buffer. In order to create this input buffer, we're going to create one last variable, and it's going to be a private float called attack press timer. This is simply going to be a basic timer, and the first thing we're going to do in our onUpdate function is we're going to subtract time.delta time from it. We're going to switch around our input, and instead of adding the should combo equal to true if we hit the input, instead we're going to set our attack press timer to a number. In this particular case, I find the best number to be 1. However, if you want to be more lenient, 2 is also good. If animator.getFloat attack window.open is greater than 0 and the attack press timer is greater than 0, we know we're in the window and we can set our should combo equal to true. And with that out of the way, nothing else needs to be changed, and we can go check out the result right now. Back into the game, if you add everything that you need to towards both the hero knight and the enemy that you've created, you should have a fluid, nice, and easy scalable combat system to use for your game, and everything should be happening. With a few clicks, you can hit your full 3-hit combo. If you hit your combo at a delay, it'll reset just nicely, and everything should be working just fine. And with that, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching.